Welcome to the Global News Podcast on YouTube, where we go behind the headlines to find out more about a story and why it matters. Today, Iran is experiencing its most serious anti-government protests in more than 15 years. The authorities have imposed an internet blackout, and the supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, has said his government will not back down. So how significant a moment is this? And could these demonstrations really spell the end of the Islamic Republic? The BBC's chief international correspondent, Lise Doucet, is here in the studio. And Lise, can you firstly tell us how these protests started?
Yes, and it's interesting, Charlotte, because the question that you posed today is the question that is asked every time there is another wave of unrest in Iran. And so too this time. And every time there is an eruption of violence across the country, of people taking to the streets, there is a different trigger. And this time it started with traders selling mobile telephones in one of the malls in Tehran because the currency had collapsed and it became impossible for them to sell mobiles, to sell electronic goods which were imported because simply the prices shot up too high. So they shuttered their shops and urged other traders to do the same. And that was December the 28th. And as always in Iran, because each subsequent protest leaves more tinder on the ground. So every time the match is lit, it actually burns the fire, rekindles the fires of the last time. So that even though it started because of the cost of living, it soon expanded, that students from the universities joined in, of course, among the most politicized in society. Then it spread from province to small, deprived provincial towns, which, of course, was mainly about the cost of living. It intensified and expanded until the Thursday night, the 12th night of protest. It was being widely described as the biggest in scale of the protests since 2009, since the major eruption over disputed presidential elections in Iran. And we were there at that time and saw that first explosion on the streets.
So this feels like an incredibly significant moment in Iran.
This is a very significant moment in Iran. Someone put it on social media this way. The numbers of 2009, although it has to be said, we're still not talking about millions on the street. There were millions out in Tehran at the peak of the protests in 2009. The numbers, he said, the numbers of 2009, but the mindset of 2026. Iran is a different place now. The clerical regime is much weaker at home. The economy is much weaker because of the weight of years of crippling sanctions. Iranians are exhausted, not just from the pain of sanctions, but also anger and frustration with mismanagement, with corruption. Iran is weaker internationally after the defeats it suffered during the Gaza war, which saw many of its allies and proxies around the region either degraded or defeated. And of course, a black cloud over this round, which is President Trump's warning, if you kill protesters, I will strike at you.
How much will this be worrying Iran's clerical rulers?
Every time there's another wave, there's another crack. When we were in Iran in the end of June, at the end of the 12-day war between Iran and Israel, I was really struck by how many women of all generations were not wearing the mandatory hijab, the headscarves, or the long coats. They were flaunting the law, knowing they could be arrested, knowing the consequences they could be in jail. There was this quiet courage on the streets, this sort of this symbol to say we are not going back. And so therefore these women again, and many from a young generation, are going onto the streets this time, and there are greater cracks. But as always, you see, they're on social media and there's in the intense conversation, both inside the country and outside, is where will this go? And we have to emphasize it remains unpredictable. It is very hard to track with any certainty the trajectory from all of these cracks, as I mentioned, this growing crisis on the streets, to the collapse of the Islamic Republic. And as always, whenever there is an uprising of some kind, whether it's Iran or anywhere else, the other question always is, will it come from below, from the streets, from the people, or will it come from above? Unless these cracks on the streets are also cracks in the ruling establishment. And so far, even though many talk about them, there's still not clear sign that they are willing to basically sacrifice all. We've always said that there is a red line for this regime, and that is their survival.
And is there a political alternative at the moment to the regime? If it fell, what would replace it?
This is not just a battle to bring down the state, and some would say they want to reform the state. Some people want to bring down the state. There's also a battle to be the next leaders. And what we have seen during these protests, is a number of opposition leaders in exile, but also inside Iran, have been making their views known. You have among some perhaps the most recognizable name, which is the exiled former Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi. He's got a very active media team, a very active, some would say aggressive presence online. It's widely believed that it was his call to Iranians made on social media saying, go into the streets at 8 o'clock at night, Iranian time. Everyone coordinate your chants together. And while it is difficult to be certain to measure these, especially when there's an internet, almost a near total blackout, when there's so much disinformation online, among the slogans which were chanted on the streets, alongside death to the dictator, don't be afraid, were those who were calling for Reza Pahlavi to return, not necessarily to bring the monarchy back, but for change. But there was also a call by Kurdish groups for a general strike. There was also a call a few days ago by a group of 17 dissidents, filmmakers, artists, led by the Nobel laureate Narges Mohammadi, who has spent many years in prison, is still in prison, saying that change, peaceful change and transition has to come from within Iran. And so as Iran contemplates, I think there is a real profound sense that something has got to change. But the absence of a clear alternative to avoid a descent into collapse is something which often stays the hand of some people and perhaps stays the hand of outside powers as well. But we live, no one listening to this podcast needs to be told, we live in deeply unpredictable times.
I was going to say that, the unpredictability of the world at the moment. Do you think that the Iranian regime will be taking Donald Trump's threats seriously about him intervening if they kill protesters, considering what happened in Venezuela?
Well, exactly. He's made the warning 3 times now. And when he was asked about it again on Thursday night, in his words, he said, "We have told the Iranians very strongly," he said. In other words, a threat they have to take seriously, that there's no doubt about it. And he said, "We will hit them very hard if they kill more protesters." Now, in his very Trump way, when he was asked about people dying, he said, well, there's been stampedes, and there's been a quizzical reaction, people saying stampedes. Of course, there's been a crush of people. So it is said that it has concentrated minds in Tehran because it has been amplified, not just by what President Trump does, but by what he is doing, the action in Venezuela. That has definitely concentrated minds in Tehran. So now they're in a bind. How to put down these protests without provoking the anger of the people on the streets or the anger of the president in the White House.
Thanks, Lise. That was our chief international correspondent, Lise Doucette. And you can hear more on this story on the Global News Podcast. Listen wherever you get your podcasts. And if you liked this episode, do please subscribe to us here on YouTube. And if you'd like us to cover any other stories, please leave a comment below.